In 1848, the discovery of gold at Sutter's mill ignited a fever that promised riches. But here's what most people don't know. The California gold rush wasn't just a story of ambitious prospectors and sudden wealth. It was a brutal, often genocidal period where the Native American population of California plummeted by an estimated 80% within 2 decades. Before 1848, roughly 150,000 indigenous people thrived across California. By 1870, this number had catastrophically dropped to around 30,000, primarily due to state-sanctioned violence, forced displacement, and disease. This wasn't merely a byproduct. It was an active campaign to clear land for mining operations, often fueled by bounty hunters paid for scalps. The 49 Ers weren't just facing rugged terrain. They faced a stark reality of rampant disease and appalling living conditions. Most prospectors didn't strike it rich, but many did contract cholera, dysentery, and scurvy, which were rampant in the unsanitary mining camps. The cramped, temporary settlements lacked basic sanitation, leading to epidemic outbreaks. For example, San Francisco's population exploded from under 1,000 in 1848 to 25,000 by 1850, overwhelming its infrastructure and creating a breeding ground for illness. Death was a constant companion, with estimates suggesting that 1 in 10 gold seekers died within their first year in California. While individual prospectors dreamed of striking it rich, the real wealth often accumulated in the hands of merchants, landowners, and those who supplied the miners. Take Sam Brannan, a savvy entrepreneur who bought up every shovel and pickaxe in San Francisco immediately after the gold discovery, then sold them back to desperate prospectors at astronomical markups, becoming California's first millionaire. This speculative economy meant that for every miner who found a nugget, dozens were sinking into debt, paying exorbitant prices for tools, food, and lodging. The dream of gold was often a carefully constructed illusion for the masses, while a select few capitalized on their desperation. The gold rush fueled a horrific wave of environmental destruction, particularly through a method called hydraulic mining. Here's what most people don't realize. From the 1850s to the 1880s, powerful water cannons were used to blast away hillsides, releasing millions of tons of sediment and debris into rivers. This process, while highly efficient for extracting gold, clogged waterways, caused massive flooding downstream and devastated agricultural lands. The mining debris transformed fertile valleys into barren landscapes, forever altering California's topography and ecological balance. The environmental damage was so profound that it led to the first major environmental lawsuits in American history, culminating in the landmark Woodruff v. North Bloomfield gravel mining co. case in 1884, which effectively outlawed large-scale hydraulic mining. The quest for gold also ignited a surge in vigilante justice and lawlessness. With official law enforcement often sparse or corrupt in remote mining districts, self-appointed committees of vigilantes frequently took matters into their own hands, leading to arbitrary arrests, sham trials, and public lynchings. The San Francisco Committee of Vigilance, formed in 1851 and again in 1856, exemplifies this dark chapter. While ostensibly fighting crime, these groups often served as vehicles for racial prejudice and political power grabs, executing dozens and exiling hundreds. Their actions highlight a period where the rule of law was fragile, easily superseded by mob rule and discriminatory biases against certain ethnic groups, particularly Chinese and Mexican immigrants. Racial discrimination was deeply entrenched, particularly against Chinese immigrants. The Chinese, often called Celestials, faced brutal violence, discriminatory laws, and social ostracization. The foreign miners' tax, introduced in 1850, disproportionately targeted non-white miners, requiring them to pay $20 a month, an exorbitant sum that few could afford, essentially excluding them from many mining districts. Here's what many don't realize. This tax alone generated nearly a quarter of California's state revenue in the early 1850s, illustrating how the state itself profited from an institutionalized discrimination. Many Chinese immigrants were driven from valuable claims and forced into low-paying labor or segregated communities, enduring constant threats of violence. The influx of American miners also severely impacted Californios, the Spanish-speaking residents of California who had settled there for generations. Under the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848, which ended the Mexican-American War, Californios were promised their property rights would be protected. However, the American legal system often disregarded their claims, leading to widespread land dispossession. American prospectors and squatters frequently jumped Californio land grants, forcing legal battles that Californios, unfamiliar with American law and lacking financial resources, often lost. This systematic disenfranchisement stripped many prominent Californio families of their ancestral lands and economic power, transforming them into a marginalized minority in their own homeland. The gold rush was a man's world, but it also created a unique, albeit often exploitative, niche for women. While prostitution was rampant and visible, many women found economic opportunities outside of it. Here's the surprising truth. They opened boarding houses, laundries, restaurants, and bakeries, catering to the desperate needs of the predominantly male population. These women, like Mary Ellen Pleasant, a self-made millionaire known as the Black Wall Street Wizardess, skillfully navigated the chaotic economy, often accumulating significant wealth. However, they still faced immense social pressure, violence, and limited rights in a society unprepared for their independent entrepreneurial spirit. The massive influx of mercury, crucial for gold extraction, unleashed another environmental and health catastrophe. Miners used mercury to amalgamate gold from crushed ore, and this toxic heavy metal was then heated to vaporize the mercury, leaving pure gold behind. Here's the terrifying detail. An estimated 10 to 15 million pounds of mercury were lost into California's rivers and ecosystems during the gold rush. This mercury contaminated waterways, poisoned fish, and seeped into the soil, leading to widespread neurological damage and chronic illness among miners and indigenous communities who relied on these resources. The legacy of mercury pollution persists in California's environment to this day. Life for African Americans during the gold rush was a paradoxical blend of opportunity and profound discrimination. While California entered the Union as a free state in 1850, it passed strict black codes, effectively limiting the rights of free blacks and making it difficult for formerly enslaved people to seek refuge or justice. However, some African Americans, both free and formerly enslaved who bought their freedom, did find success in the goldfields or as entrepreneurs. For instance, Alvin Coffey, an enslaved man, mined enough gold to purchase his freedom and later returned to Missouri to free his family. Yet, this relative success was often against a backdrop of constant threat, violence, and discriminatory legal battles. The gold rush also attracted adventurers and fortune-seekers from across the globe, creating an incredibly diverse, yet often volatile melting pot. Australians, Europeans, Latin Americans, and Chinese all converged on California, each bringing their own cultures and dreams. Here's the brutal reality. This diversity often led to intense competition and violent ethnic clashes over mining claims. For instance, Latin American miners, particularly from Chile and Sonora, Mexico, were often among the most experienced prospectors, but they faced severe discrimination and violence, frequently driven off their claims by American mobs. The foreign miners' tax, previously mentioned, was initially levied to specifically target these experienced non-American miners. The sheer physical brutality of mining work meant injuries and accidents were commonplace, often with fatal consequences. Prospectors toiled in harsh conditions, exposed to extreme weather, landslides, and primitive tools. Here's what most people don't consider. Without modern safety regulations, collapsed tunnels, falling rocks, and accidental explosions were daily risks. Many miners suffered from chronic back pain, respiratory illnesses from dust, and amputations due to accidents. The average life expectancy in some mining camps was alarmingly low, and many men were left permanently disabled, unable to return home or support themselves, becoming reliant on charity or dying in poverty far from their families. California's rapid statehood in 1850 was largely driven by the gold rush, but this swift transition came at a steep moral cost. Here's a crucial detail. The newly formed state government quickly enacted a series of laws that codified discrimination and violence against Native Americans. The 1850 Act for the Government and Protection of Indians, for example, legalized the enslavement of indigenous people by allowing white settlers to declare any Native American without employment as a vagrant and subject them to forced labor. It also permitted the indentured servitude of Native American children. These laws effectively institutionalized the destruction of indigenous communities, masking systemic exploitation under the guise of legal order. The perception of instant wealth was mostly a myth. While some individuals did strike it rich, the vast majority of prospectors either broke even or lost money. Here's the hard truth. The average miner made about $10 a day, which, while more than many earned back east, was barely enough to cover the exorbitant cost of living in California. A pound of coffee could cost $4, and a shovel $50 or more. The high prices for food, tools, and services devoured most earnings, leaving many trapped in a cycle of relentless labor with little to show for it. The dreams of easy gold often ended in disillusionment, poverty, and shattered hopes. San Francisco, the gateway to the goldfields, became a city of extreme contrasts and rampant crime. Its population boom led to a chaotic urban environment where fortunes were made and lost overnight. Here's a lesser-known fact. Between 1849 and 1851, the city experienced 6 major fires that almost completely destroyed its wooden structures, fueled by rapid, unregulated construction. These fires were often attributed to arson by criminal gangs or opportunists, creating an atmosphere of fear and instability. Despite the devastation, the city rebuilt itself with astonishing speed, highlighting the relentless drive for profit and the transient nature of its inhabitants. The gold dust, often used as currency in the early days, also led to widespread fraud and deception. Here's a cunning trick. Unscrupulous merchants and assiers would often doctor their scales or mix cheaper metals with the gold dust to cheat unsuspecting miners. The lack of standardized currency or reliable banking institutions meant that miners were constantly vulnerable to exploitation. Dusting or salting claims, planting gold dust in barren areas to trick buyers, was also a common scam. This pervasive dishonesty contributed to the atmosphere of mistrust and further solidified the idea that the gold rush was a ruthless environment where only the most cunning survived. The gold rush significantly impacted global trade and finance, but not always for the better for everyone. Here's a fascinating detail. The sudden influx of Californian gold destabilized global economies, contributing to inflation and shifts in monetary policy across Europe and beyond. While it fueled industrial growth and facilitated trade routes, it also led to financial bubbles and busts in distant markets. For instance, the British economy felt the impact, experiencing both booms and slumps tied to the volatility of gold supplies. This interconnectedness shows how a localized gold fever had far-reaching and complex economic ripple effects, reshaping international commerce. The destruction of Native American cultural heritage was immense and largely irreversible. Beyond the physical violence, the gold rush systematically dismantled indigenous societies, breaking down social structures, spiritual practices, and traditional economies. Here's what's tragically overlooked. Sacred sites were desecrated, ancestral lands were ravaged by mining, and traditional food sources were destroyed. This cultural genocide meant the loss of languages, oral histories, and intricate knowledge systems that had sustained these communities for millennia. The trauma inflicted during this period continues to impact Native American communities in California today, representing a profound and enduring wound. The myth of the self-made, independent prospector often overshadows the rise of corporate power in the later stages of the gold rush. Here's what most people don't know. By the late 1850s and 1860s, individual placer mining became less profitable, giving way to large-scale, capital-intensive operations like hydraulic and hard rock mining. These required massive investments in machinery, water rights, and labor, pushing out small-time miners and creating a new class of wage laborers. Companies like the North Bloomfield Gravel Mining Co., a hydraulic mining giant, dominated the industry, symbolizing the shift from individual entrepreneurialism to industrial-scale exploitation of both resources and labor, transforming California's economic landscape. The gold rush created a deep-seated legacy of social inequality that reverberates in California today. The rapid accumulation of wealth for a few, coupled with the exploitation and dispossession of many, established a foundational class structure. Here's the enduring impact. The patterns of racial discrimination against Native Americans, Chinese immigrants, and Californios laid the groundwork for future discriminatory practices and institutionalized inequalities in land ownership, labor rights, and political representation. Understanding the gold rush's dark side isn't just about historical curiosity. It's about recognizing how these foundational injustices shaped the social fabric of one of America's most diverse and economically powerful states. informing debates on reparations, environmental justice, and social equity.